Hey everyone, thank you for joining us tonight on a Saturday night. What are you nerds doing here talking about D&D? We're glad you are, though, one way or the other. Let me give a quick rundown on this format. The whole idea was an opportunity for Kelsey and I specifically to start talking about how two personas craft adventures, namely the author and the original intent there, and the DM and the way that gets translated to the actual tabletop. So if you don't know by now, I am joined tonight by the wonderful Kelsey Dionne from the Arcane Library. Kelsey, why don't you give us a quick introduction and let folks know who you are?
Sure. Well, hey, I'm Kelsey Dionne, and I'm the writer. I'm, I guess, the only person for the Arcane Library. I get to write and design adventures, and they have seen some play on the Castle Mac stream, which is so exciting. And that's I guess what I'm known for. That's it.
Yeah, they're the best adventures, which is why we're here today. I think Sean and I have collectively run almost every single one of Kelsey's adventures, minus one, I think, at this point. We're just one behind. And that will change soon. We're going to run that one soon. So, hey, I think we're going to dive right in. Quick introduction for those of you who don't know me. I'm Castle Mac Steven, one of the DMs on the Castle Mac channel, and mostly spend my time nerding out about overlays and audio settings and stuff like that when I'm not thinking about Dungeons and Dragons, which is 90% of the time. So cool. All right. Well, let's jump right in. I think, one of the topics that kind of intrigued us, right? And one of the things that I think Sean and I are really keen to learn more about, and hopefully some of the people tuning in here, is what's your process when you have an idea for an adventure? How do you get started? Like what's the first step? Walk me through it.
Oh, that's such a good question. I think, I guess the first step for an adventure is when I have an idea, it's usually not something that's like a fully born adventure right away. Mm-hmm. So it's usually I'll have an idea for like a location or a particular event or a boss or like a monster. And then I'll have to let that sort of percolate for a while. So it goes into your brain and you sort of collect inspiration and ideas, and you see something cool. You see a movie poster that's epic and you're like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if I had a scene that looked like that? And
sure.
It swirls around for a bit. Then it starts to make its way out. It turns into notes, little bullet points in a notebook. Then I think by the time by the time you have enough like scenes or visual things that you're beginning to write them down, I think that's kind of the time when you're like, hey, I should start to force some organization upon this and then spin it out into maybe a story.
That's awesome. So it kind of starts with these amorphous ideas, right? In the primordial soup, you've got your single-celled organisms.
Yes. And that's the part you can't force, right? Because
right.
I think like sitting down writing or really doing anything is sort of like a practice, like you sit down and you do it, even if that day you don't really feel like it.
Sure.
But the stew of ideas, you have to let that come from somewhere in the astral plane. I don't know. You just collect cool things. You play video games, you read books, you do stuff that you think is cool, and then those ideas start to accumulate.
Yeah, that's not far off, I think, from the approach to DMing, right? I'm always kind of borrowing ideas from everywhere. To your point, some crazy movie, there's some scene that I'm like, oh, that would make an awesome D&D encounter. Here's how I could think about throwing that in there.
Exactly.
So you just have to cast a wide net.
Yeah, and you have to let yourself refill your creativity bowl or cauldron, I guess. Mm-hmm. I don't know. You have to seek out the things that you find cool, and then that will in turn inspire you. But Steven, I find this so interesting because I get to sit down, like I get to take as long as I want on that process as a writer, but then you are running games like on a weekly schedule, and you have players and stories that are happening quickly and developing quickly. So when you're coming up with like ways to incorporate material into your games, like how do you find inspiration? Like what do you do to like move your story forward?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I've been a little bit remiss. I'm going to take a quick pause before I come back to that question and say, guys in chat, the reason we've put the chat on the actual screen itself so that this can be viewed later, but also because we are okay with you guys asking a question at any time. We're here to be engaging and to answer questions that people have, and I should have mentioned that before. And I also, in my nervousness to get going, which I never get nervous, but I was nervous going into this, a huge thank you to Maddie over at So Chatty with Maddie and So Maddie Games on Twitter. I love that we're trying to form this D&D talk show power hour on Saturdays or something, and that was a really good show watching Maddie interview folks, and Castle Mac Sean was over there too, and I was trying to make him laugh on the side because we're evil jerks to each other. But that was a great show, and thank you guys for the raid. Thanks for setting that up, Maddie. Really truly appreciate it and love everything you do. So sorry about that. I should have said that earlier. Coming back to your question, Kelsey, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about how different it is. So you have to definitely take a more careful approach, and your story has to, I imagine, be much more kind of cohesive. So you have these ideas that start coming together, but the reason you have to be so much more thoughtful about it, I think, is because you're writing for people you don't know. When I'm coming up with an adventure, I know exactly what buttons to push. And that's my joy, is that I've known my players for, in many cases, well over a decade, and in some cases, at least a couple of years. So it's easy for me almost on the fly to be like, oh, I'm going to mess with Raven right now. And I know what's going to mess with her. And so it's easy for me to kind of be able to pivot on that, just knowing, what they expect out of games and things like that. So we did have our first question in the chat, Kelsey, and I think we'll go ahead and address that. And the question is, do you focus on the story, the players, or the rules when you start building a campaign? And I think in your case, we can talk about a kind of an adventure rather than a campaign. I'm not sure if you've done a full scale campaign yet, although I hope you do eventually.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I guess like on the micro level and adventure, I think I first focus on the story because the rules never change, and so those you can always rely on to be consistent, and it's kind of easy to go back and apply the rules when you need to if you've maybe written something that's not totally buttoned up. But
sure,
I think that story is big, and then your audience, the players, which I'm glad you pointed that out, Staggering Giant. Do you think about the players when you're writing? Absolutely. It's the number one thing. I think you're thinking about the DM, because the DM is your way of telling the story. So you're really talking to the DM when you're writing, and your first priority should be making sure the DM knows what you're trying to pitch, and that the purpose of what you're putting in there is clear to the DM, because if it's not going to make its way to the players. So I think it's kind of interesting. You frame your writing around how can the DM make this about the players.
That's great. You almost have to trust in the DM to be that translator. Right?
Yes. It's critical.
Right. You're working on the assumption that the DM is gonna understand the story, and you've certainly baked in things intrinsic for, I'm sure you think about things like, why should the character care about this? Why should the characters want to get involved in this? But ultimately a lot of that is up to the DM to sell it, right?
It's so funny that you said, because I have to say this and commend both you and Sean so much, because I think if people think that my adventures are interesting, it's because you guys perform them so fantastically.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
It's amazing. Like because I've written them, and so when I'm watching you guys play them, I can see the moments where you're using your skill as a DM to sort of push the story in a direction or add a detail here that I never would have thought of. And for any of the viewers, if you ever get the chance, if you become familiar with an adventure that anyone on Castle Mac is going to run beforehand, just as sort of a thought experiment, and then you watch what these guys as DMs do, it's like a masterclass in how to interpret an adventure.
Thank you.
Players.
That's super kind of you. But I think part of that is, quite frankly, that you set your adventures up as a springboard for DM. So you definitely deserve some credit there, because we've run plenty of other adventures, and not all of them are as easy to riff on. It's almost like a good, you provide a great trunk so that we can grow the branches, right? Oh. There are some adventures, and I think this dovetails right into a question that Sean just posted in the chat about you talking to your NPC blocks. Those really stuck with us because you focus on, if I remember right, 3 things, right? What is their dues, right? What they do, and that's sort of, showing rather than telling. So this is what this character does. You focus on their appearance because that's important for a DM to be able to convey, and then you focus on a secret that they have. And that's what you give about an NPC. You don't focus on their alignment. You don't focus on kind of anything else, their racial traits. And those to me are just such a good springboard.
Thank you. Those come from wanting that bit of information when I'm running games, because when you're throwing an NPC out there, as Steven, like, you just get a second to paint a picture of who this person is. And you don't have time to just sit down and read through a stat block and then read through 3 paragraphs of backstory about what this person really wants. And so I think knowing what they want and what they do to get there is really essential. It's really the only thing that is at the core of why an NPC is even in the game.
I agree 100%. And you do it in, probably the length of a tweet, or maybe just over the length of a tweet. So it's very easy as a quick reference, like, who is this person again? Cool. It's right there. It's not in an appendix. It's in line with where the NPC is introduced. And I'm just going to throw a little bit of shade real fast on Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Compare the introduction to the NPCs in chapter 2 of Waterdeep Dragon Heist, which, we'll talk about adventures later. I think one of the topics we want to discuss are doing some published adventure reviews, but those NPCs are introduced very poorly, in my opinion, specifically the NPCs in Troll Skull Alley, because it's all stats. It's all the how, right? They have these racial traits, and once per day they can cast this cantrip, and this is their alignment, but it doesn't give you anything about them, really, in my opinion.
That's tough. I mean, because an adventure is a reference for the DM ultimately at the table. Like, if you can't use it as a quick reference, and you have to pause the game to read a bunch of backstory or figure out what you're allowed to tell the players and what's not supposed to be known immediately, it's all mixed together. I feel like that's always been something that actually prevented me from even wanting to really sit down and read through really dense adventures like back in the day, like Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil. I remember as a younger person trying to sit down and read that so many times and just being like, I can't even get through this because it's so kind of mixed together, Right.
And just somewhat related, but I just want to throw this as an aside. I think Sean and I will throw Jake in there as well, because Jake has run Crypts of Arazum for me, and I think he did a fantastic job as well. I think veteran DMs definitely take to your format really well because you provide those springboards, but I would be really curious to see a junior DM try it as well, because you're so concise. That I've played games with people who are brand new to DMing, and they feel like they have to read everything off the page, and they're referencing appendices in the middle of talking, of role playing. I bet even a junior DM and would really take to that format, I think.
Oh, I hope so, because you worry that maybe a more junior DM feels comfort in having a huge abundance of details to fall back on, and having box text to read instead of improvising it. I do wonder about that, actually. So I've had new DMs tell me that they've used one of my adventures as their first games, which is possibly the most flattering thing someone can say to you.
Right.
And I guess I've had good feedback from them on it, but I've always been curious, what would their experience have been if they'd been using a more dense adventure the first time?
Sure. I'd be really curious to see that, actually. I know Lydia's been wanting to DM a story, so maybe I'll let her do one of the ones that she hasn't played yet and see what she thinks, because I think it's easy. It's some good references. So, all right, getting to a couple of questions here. The first question when writing an adventure, how much time is spent on research for the adventure versus actual writing? And I think I'll just expand on that a little bit for my own curiosity. How about playtesting? What's your approach to kind of playtesting adventures? And if that can be really challenging, so...
Oh gosh, it can. Playtesting is probably the hardest thing, really, because I only run one game a week. I have one group of players who are sort of like my punching bags, those poor people. But they get a lot of my early ideas that I'm still developing, and just running them at the table helps to actually expand on them.
Gotcha.
Because you're forced as a DM to sort of improvise and think of an NPC when there wasn't one and see the flaws. So I actually would really recommend, if anybody is in the act of writing an adventure, playtest it before you set things in stone. Throw it in front of a group of players and see what they come up with, and that will help you figure out what to write into the adventure. And I have to say, somebody asked a question at the very beginning and I didn't want to ignore it, and it was so nice.
I missed it, so.
It was, how does it feel to have created so many adventures? It feels really nice. Thank you. It's really
Nice.
cool to think that there's a lot of options that you can give people.
All right. I'm taking a quick second here to set up a giveaway because Maddie is so kind as to give away a set of dice from Tabletop Loot. It takes me just a moment to set that up, so I will. But I will pitch you another question here that I think is really important, and I think that you do a good job of, again, in your adventures because they're very concise. How do you know when you've given enough information? How do you feel like you've provided enough detail? And do you ever get worried that, you could have missed something or that the DM might not pick up on other clues? When do you feel like, and maybe the flip side of that question is like, how do you know what to leave on the cutting room floor? How do you make those hard decisions? Because you fit your, essentially each act or each like encounter onto one page.
I do, and that's really important to me, actually, is to do the one-page thing, because again, it's all about, like, you have to make the choice of, is making this an easy reference more important, or is getting that last sentence I really want in there more important? And so
sure.
in every case, in my opinion, it should be making it an easier reference for the DM. So there's a lot that ends up cut in my adventures. It's sometimes it really hurts, like
sure.
You just want that one little description or that one key piece of information out there. So I don't think that's ever easy, but I really think that less is more is always true, because, and Steven, you can speak to this, but there's like diminishing returns to having too much description. Like if I can give you like, I want to give you the important things to say to the players that's going to help influence their decisions.
Right.
But beyond that, like, what more is there to say? Like the DM should be given permission to expand if needed on things.
No, I agree. The more you give, the less room for improv there is for a DM. But I'm sure there's a balancing act, right? If you don't give enough, you run the risk of someone missing an important detail. And I'm reminded all the time about the difficulty in translating what's in my head and what I envision a scene to players. And I have a great example of that happened last Sunday. So as part of your adventure, I had the heroes go to Club Levantis with King Raimi. And outside, I decided, mind reading is illegal in Waterdeep, but I wanted to have this very clear, like there's a bouncer there and she's reading people's minds as they come in. And so I described that process probably more than I described anything about the physical characteristics of the building. And so Raven took that as a cue that like I was trying to give them a hint that they need to engage this person, when in fact I just thought it was a cool idea that like, hey, flaunting against the law. So, that was something where I'm glad it went down that way, but I feel like that's something that I kind of failed at. But, you always roll with failure when you're improving. I think that's an example of I gave so much information that it affected the outcome, right? Rather than sort of this neutral, you want to be almost neutral, right? And you read about like instructions for running Tomb of Horrors back in the day, right? You have to give this very neutral response so as not to color what the players think or perceive.
Yeah, that's such a hard decision, I'm sure, though, to make in the moment, because I was going to ask you the reverse, like when you're given a scene to set, like how do you choose what to tell the players? Because ultimately it comes down to how you want to convey it. Like I'm sure that even like the pace you're trying to set in the moment is going to influence that decision. But like,
right.
Like when you're given like a wall of text, how do you decide what to tell them?
Yeah, it's really difficult. And in a lot of the earlier books, there were more kind of those blocks of text describing a scene, and I would tend to rewrite them. It wasn't always because I thought the information was bad. It just wasn't my voice, and it would have sounded like I was just reading a block of text. I don't know. I think that's actually one of the things I really struggle with and think about a lot is how best to convey information. And one of the things I've really focused on in the last couple months is making sure I'm always touching at least two different senses. So, I'm always trying to think about, okay, what does the ground feel like beneath their feet as they like step, if that's an important detail, just to try to set the scene in their mind's eye. So I don't know. I think I try to give as many details as I can to play on kind of shared experiences so that they can see the setting as I do as best I can, but, making sure to not always give them the clear, like, this is what you need to do or what I want you to do. It's a challenge, to be honest with you, Yeah,
that might actually be one of the hardest parts, is figuring out what to convey to the players where you're not like giving too much away. but you're encouraging them to like investigate what's important about that situation.
Right.
It's actually really hard. So I don't really know.
Yeah. It's something I think about a lot, but it is really challenging. And especially if you're on the fly, you're like, shoot, did I just say, like, I focus on an NPC because that was a detail in my head. In fact, I mean, I have nothing that I care about. Like, that NPC is just there for dressing. But now everyone's like, oh, what's up with this NPC that looked at me funny? You know?
Exactly. Which can lead to more fun stuff ultimately.
Right.
Like, it's not a bad thing at all. But it's funny. I was thinking about, because your like descriptions and improvisation in Club Levantis when you guys were running Treaty of the Tiger King was so good. It was so amazing because there was so much to fit on that page that it was a pretty sparse description, and I'm so impressed by it and happy with like what you did to sort of build the vibe inside that area, which makes it clear that you must have had like a really strong vision in your head of like what it was going to be like inside, you know?
Yeah, it was super fun. And part of that, you know, we talked earlier about the benefit I get of like playing to my players. You know, people who play with me know I don't really like overtly magical things. So Club Levantis is one of the craziest things I've ever done when they're not on a different plane, because I like, you know, I want Lord of the Rings more than, you know, Eberron or something. Right. So for me, I knew it was a fun opportunity to one of the themes that's been coming out of our Waterdeep game is this growing divide between the nobility and the common people, which is a common thing, but how the heroes, I think to quote Sean, how the heroes in many ways work to maintain that old power balance, right? Like they're defending the realm, but who's really benefiting from that? So anyways, I wanted to have that like over the top, ostentatious, all the magic is gathered here. It's an experience that no commoner in Waterdeep even knows is happening. And here they have, you know, flying snakes delivering snacks and stuff like that. Just, you know.
That was such an awesome detail. I was like, this is so cool. And another thing I was gonna, in same scene, you came up with an NPC on the fly that was not written into the story at all. It was the manager of Levantis, which was amazing. And I was going to ask you, like, because you had a perfect poker face, but like I, as the writer, knew that NPC was completely made up on the spot, and I was so impressed. And I was going to ask you if you were able to maybe talk about how you can just do that on the spot.
Sure. Yeah, that was a funny one. I 100% knew by having the bouncers ask the characters to leave their weapons, at least one of them was going to have a problem with it. And so I was already expecting to like, I'm sorry, can I talk to your manager? So I had actually a little bit prepped for that. I wasn't 100% sure it was going to happen, and I didn't really have a name on hand or anything like that, but I knew that was going to come up. So I just thought about the type of personality who would run a club for nobility, you know, over the course of several hundred years in his case, because he was an elf. And so I just kind of thought about the handful of things that he would say, and I think it was almost practiced, right? Like, this probably comes up every now and again where someone doesn't want to leave their weapons, and hey, I'm just doing a job, I'm just protecting, you know, but he has a reputation and all this stuff. So it was kind of born almost just out of necessity, but I was interested to see if they would have escalated it, because I was kind of thinking like, what am I going to do? Are they going to turn them away? They might have.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And so that leads me into another question that, like, I'm being greedy now because I really just want to know this. I'm so interested in how you approach this stuff. Like, what do you do to prepare for adventures? Because this is something you thought of ahead of time in advance then. So you were thinking this through already.
Okay, well, my secret is I take a really long shower before Sunday nights, because that's when I'm most creative.
That's like the shower test. It's like, you care about something if you're thinking about it in the shower. You know?
I'm just kind of standing there like, all right, well, they're probably gonna not like putting their weapons up, so I should probably have something. But the truth is, I don't come anywhere near planning for every situation, right? I think about the situations that might come up, and that's usually about it. Like, I almost have like a stump of an idea. And in that case, it's like, they're probably going to have a problem with that. I'll have a manager. I'll kind of come up with who they are on the fly, kind of what I'm feeling at the moment. Lydia outed me there. I do practice my character voices in the shower. So I might have a stub of an idea for something more complicated. That can be challenging. I mean, I'm usually just, pulling it out of thin air. And those situations are fun too. Those high stress situations, like, I was not expecting this. okay, let's roll, right?
Yeah, but that's exactly why I play test my adventures in the writing process with a group, because
Right.
you are always forced to improvise when you're DMing. Like, I can't think of a single
Right.
time I have not been forced to improvise. And those are things that are like, they're telling, you know, if you're like,
Yeah.
I had to make up this entire description of this room on the spot. For me as a writer, I'm like, well, maybe I should incorporate that for the Dungeon Master, you know?
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it works. And so quick shout out to chat here. We do have a question, but before that, I do have the raffle going. As you guys can see, I accidentally used my Eris Savad, I think Eris Savad giveaway, which will be tomorrow. This giveaway is for a set of dice courtesy of Maddie from Tabletop Loot. So sorry you guys are seeing that incorrect text there. Seems like I'm not the only one who comes up with stuff in the shower, so that's good to hear. But I seriously, I'm like, well, it's like 5 o'clock. Everyone's going to be on like an hour and a half. I'm going to go do some last minute prep and think through potential situations. But I do that
too, though. I do. It's actually kind of amazing. I totally think all the time about D&D in the shower.
Yeah. Oh, it's the best time, just staring at the ground, thinking. Okay, so there was a question that I don't want to miss, and it was, how do you differentiate or describe someone who is a key NPC rather than an NPC that can be a great asset but is not needed? That's probably more a DM question, I would guess, because as an author, you can say, you know, hey, this is a key player versus, you know, this is kind of just background. So if the question is to how do I describe that to the players, you know, it's a little bit of show, don't tell, and maybe the inflection of my voice. I will say I've started using, I kind of wanted to mention some tools to help with improv. I now keep a list of names handy, right? And my players know me so well. I'm terrible with coming up with names on the fly. That's one thing I cannot do that. And so, you know, if Sean or Raven says, hey, what's that character's name? And I'm like, oh shit, hold on. They know it's not an important NPC. Whereas if I'm like, well, my name is blah, 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 they're like, oh, okay, this person's important. That's not true anymore, because I now have I'm always ready to fire from the hip when someone asks me what the name is. So Shifty, the way I approach that, the way I, you know, think of someone who's a key NPC is I make it clear through the actual actions, right? If someone's important, they're going to seem important in some way, or they're going to talk to the characters with some knowledge that other people don't have, you know, or some background NPC is just not going to matter, or they're going to be dismissive.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think you sort of have the onus is on the DM to kind of get it out there, whether an NPC is really important or not. And like, I think you probably even in a way are help guiding players away from unimportant NPCs, like like figuring out ways to gracefully shut that down so you're not throwing them off for a red herring forever, you know? Right,
exactly. Yeah, you kind of have to just show it, right? You can't tell someone, hey, this person isn't important, but they can be like, okay, well, I've got this other arrangement, good luck with what you're doing, or whatever. You can communicate that and hint that. Hint at that. Let's see. Okay, so I saw another question here, which was, do you guys nerf your players if a combo is way too OP? What do you think? Do you ever nerf your players?
I mean, no, I just make things harder for them then.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah. You never want to take away, right? Half the fun is, and sometimes we're generous. I mean, Sean always gives out incredibly cool magic items. I've been stingier lately. There's almost no magic items in our Waterdeep games, but yeah, I never nerf players. You never want to take from them. I don't think that doesn't help anyone's enjoyment. I might prey on someone. It's like, you know, oh, you're the totem of the bear. Nothing hurts you but psychic. Guess what? You're fighting a mind flayer.
There you
go. So, you know, I might find the weaknesses and kind of, you know, hammer at them. But nah, I would never nerf anybody, not mechanically.
Yeah, and just because like a player has achieved OP status, you're still in control. You're the DM. You're still in control. So like, I actually, people ask about that sometimes. They're like, well, when you're writing, how do you account for people who have ridiculous builds? And I'm like, I rely on their DM to be a DM and just make sure that they're changing the situation so it's harder for their individual players.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, you know, this is something Sean and I talk about a lot too. Some encounters the PCs just walk through, and that can be fun too. Like if you come up, right, it's like if you come up on a fight and you just wreck the bad guys, I rarely think the players had a bad time.
Right,
because
it's actually really gratifying to do that.
yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, that's right, I am a badass, and don't y'all forget it. And the next fight can be harder, but it can be fun.
Yeah, and in fact, like I write easy encounters sometimes for that exact reason, because sometimes you're trying to show the players that they're powerful, and it's actually like you could use that like as a DM or I guess an adventure writer. You can totally use that contrast. Like you always want to be using contrasts whenever you can. Like here you're super strong, but over there you're weak, and then it drives it home.
Yeah, it's super fun, and you can force the cooperation, right? Like, hey, this guy's weak at this tonight, but she's really strong in this, so it's her time to shine, right? Which is really fun. Okay, so I'm going to move to another question, because I really like this kind of thought, and I think someone asked this in our Discord a couple days ago. How do you, as a writer, strike a balance between filling an adventure with flavor, but also keeping it setting agnostic?
Oh, that's okay. So, in fact, everything I write turns out to be setting agnostic because, and part of that is actually because of the laws of publishing for D&D. So, if it was kind of by force, but with the open gaming license, which is what third-party people can use to publish, it's literally a set of stuff that Wizards of the Coast gives you that you're allowed to use, and all of it's very neutral, and a lot of like the intellectual property, like monsters and stuff that Wizards holds dear to their hearts, is not included, so you can't actually use that. And so it does kind of force you to be setting neutral. Like I couldn't write something for Eberron and publish it under the Arcane library.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is a fun. It's kind of an interesting tap dance, because I just wrote an adventure that's meant to be for Waterdeep, but I couldn't say that in it.
Right. Right.
So.
It's a major port city.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the approach to writing in that case is you research the place where you kind of want it to land. Like if you want a terrible desert like Dark Sun, you can make your own terrible desert and make it you just don't name any particular locations, and you can still, like, what's cool about the desert, it's not the name. It's not the fact that it's Dark Sun. It's the struggle for survival. It's the managing resources. So you can isolate what is interesting about a setting that has nothing to do with the names or the actual specific locations. And then you just build your adventure around those like core, like kernels of truth,
Sure. Yeah, it makes total sense. It's almost like they're just meant to be modular. You can plug them in where they work, and you can focus on the stuff that matters. And frankly, the skeleton of what town or city it is, who cares?
It doesn't matter in the end. Yeah, it can in some of my adventures, I actually don't even outline the city at all. I say this starts in a port town. Mm-hmm. Because then it can be any port town you want,
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. No, it totally works. All right, so two things. Number one, congratulations to the Staggering Giant for winning that. And Maddie, thank you so much for having that giveaway. That was really cool of you, man, and really thoughtful. Moving forward, do have a couple of questions. So the first one is, how did you first come across Kelsey's work, and what stood out that made you want to run more of her material? I think that question's for me, so I think I can run with that. To be honest, I think my first encounter was with the Skyhorn Lighthouse, and that's because I was on a crazy adventure purchasing spree where I now have bought like probably 50% of what's on DM's Guild. And this may surprise people who know me, but I have them like really well organized. Like they have a taxonomy, like this takes place here and it's for these levels and it's this long and this one takes place. So yeah, I'm hyper organized about stuff like that. And so I was just kind of skimming them. And as I skimmed yours, I saw the very unique layout. And the very unique layout that Kelsey uses, and I highly suggest you guys go check some stuff out. There's a couple of free adventures that she has, but I would buy everything. That you can get a sweet little discount right now as well, as a matter of fact, if I remember. You want to plug that real quick, Kelsey?
Yeah, no, there's a discount on my site. The code is Advengineers. It's like a portmanteau of adventure engineers, because I needed it to be short, but it's 15% off everything on the site. So if you want to scope, I have free adventures, and they're free because I want people to be able to play more games. But there's also for sale stuff if you really like my work and you want more of it. So you can scope it out for cheaper.
If you guys check it out, you would be hard pressed to not find it incredible. But so here's what jumped out to me. Number one, your layout, you fit everything on a single page, which as a DM who tends to read it, 2 or 3 times ahead of time and like think about it in terms of those encounters, that's a really great layout structure. But within that skeleton, again, we talked about one of the components, your NPC explanations are, to me, like, that's the way to describe an NPC. As a DM, maybe I don't speak for all DMs, but for me, that's like my wavelength. Like, I just want to know those 3 things and run with it. And then you also, this is what sold me. I loved it so much. For each page and each like encounter, there's this narrative question, right? It's sort of what is the why of this scene? Why does this scene even exist? It's not just there to be filler, it's doing something. It's, there's some decision to be made or some challenge to be overcome. And so you very clearly say the narrative question here is this, and upon resolution, it's time to move on. Which, like, you give a skeleton for pacing, and pacing in narratives is everything. And it's, I think about pacing all the time, right down to right now when we start our streams. I'm really trying to not do the 20-minute walk around the table and tell us who your character is. I just want to get to the action and think about the pacing, because that's what movies do and that's what books do, right? They show, they don't tell, they get you moving. When something is resolved in a situation, you change scenes, you don't linger. And role-playing games can become quite I don't know what the right word is, almost self-indulgent, of just sitting there and kind of doing nothing. But hey, if there's a question, let's explore it. And if there's not, then let's move ahead. And so that's something I'm always focused on. I think your adventures lend themselves perfectly to giving the DM the tools to think about pacing. That's what got me, was the pacing, to be honest.
Thank you. Oh, I'm just glad that it works, that it helps people, know when to move on, because I didn't know that when I first started DMing. Like, I would linger in scenes and I'd be like, they're looting the crap out of this room and there's nothing interesting in here, but they're not, like, right, nothing's happening right now. Like, so that was the whole reason behind that. And I think it's so funny. You said the word self-indulgent, and that's actually, like, since I've been writing, I feel like one of the key things about writing successfully is to avoid being self-indulgent. Like, sure. Is there like something, did you like write something into the scene that you just want there to show like how crazily you can talk about something? Like, that's a little bit self-indulgent. So fighting that, I guess, tendency is actually what leads to like tighter craft. Yeah. Whether you're awesome. DMing or whether you're writing. So yeah.
And I got to admit, it's something I hadn't thought about much beforehand. And I honestly think reading Skyhorn Lighthouse helped me solidify that thought, particularly as we've gone from, decades of role playing to now streaming. I, as a DM, do have to think about it just a little bit differently. And I think it's for the better, even for the players, because previously, hey, we could have a night where we just sit around and sort our treasure. Like, that's cool. That's fun to do. But as streamers, we also have to think about the audience who are participants now as well. And so I think if I think about it more cinematically, and where I'm trying to have cinematic pacing, I think everybody benefits. I think the players have a great time. We were talking the other night, just to be completely honest, I think what we're doing with Waterdeep Dragon Eyes is some of the best role playing this group has ever had. Like, I think it's kind of, we're singing, and I love it. I'm so proud of it and have so much fun with it, but I think that also translates to people watching.
Maybe. I wonder, do you think having an audience in a way kind of inspires more epicness? Because I kind of think it does, like if that people care beyond just who you're in front of at the moment, like there's something kind of magical about that.
Absolutely. And I do see some questions in chat. We're going to come to these, but that's such an interesting question that I really want to follow it. When we first started streaming, I was scared, to be honest, that it would incent the wrong behavior, because our crew, they're good role players. Like Lydia and Sean and Raven and Coach and Jeff, who we play with, and Andrew, we're all really good role players. We're on the same wavelength. And to be just completely honest, and I said this with them, and I'll share it with you, I was worried that once we were on camera, people were going to go for the cheap laughs or like really amp it up and kind of, deliberately be disruptive. And everything we do is based around making sure those behaviors. Not that they're wrong behaviors. They're not my wavelength and kind of our group's wavelength. We make sure those are protected. You know, a lot of streams, for example, do where bits give a specific player a reroll or a D20 or an automatic 20. And we opted not to do that so that we wouldn't find ourselves suddenly every time Lydia says spork, everyone gives her bits. And so that incents that behavior. So I was worried about that, but I think the opposite effect actually happened. I think we all feel like this is our thing. This is our kind of, you know, value, I guess, you know, and what we do is this kind of, we take role playing very seriously. And so I think we all want to be on our A game, and we've kind of amplified that. I would love to hear if any of the Castle Mac folks in chat agree or disagree with that, but I think it really, it has changed it, but I think for the better.
Ooh, I'm seeing Lydia saying that yes, it does.
Yeah, bits for Sparks is definitely happening. Okay, I'm scrolling up just a little bit to I definitely don't want to miss our friend Shannon. She had a question. How do you deal with romances in game if they come up, whether it's between PCs or a PC and NPC? That's a great question.
Tell me. I want to know how you deal with it, because now I want to write things that mess with that.
Sure.
You know how...
It hasn't happened a lot for us, and I don't think it's happened at all since streaming, although we've kind of talked about boundaries and seeing if something like that could happen in Waterdeep, and I think that could be a lot of fun to explore. The only times we've done it, we treat it extremely tastefully. You know, obviously lots of cut to blacks, you know, and besides that, I don't know. I guess we don't really in the end treat it all that differently than a very friendly NPC, but we've had characters, you know, get married. We had a jump in time where a character now had a child, and that was wonderful. Like, it was just a really cool, fun thing that you can play with and have this kind of extra little facet to the game. So how we deal with it, I don't know. I guess it's kind of a case-by-case basis, but we certainly try to make sure there's some boundaries and, you know, that it doesn't get weird. I mean, it could get weird. We've got couples at our table, right? So if I'm suddenly, ask Raven about Irina. Raven hated Irina because Sean's character and Irina from Strahd were getting a little close, and there was some palpable tension there, but
Oh, no.
I think it just joking around. We haven't come up against it too much, but I think we're prepared to, and I think it might happen in Waterdeep. We might, but I think there would be more planning around it than there would be any other NPC relationship, right?
Yeah, and then I mean, I'm sure as a DM and as a writer as well, like if you know that there's an important relationship, whatever it may be, for one of your players, like that is a gold mine of story, because suddenly this powerful hero has someone who you can threaten, who they would care just as much about as their own safety. And so I would encourage that in some way or another, to like have strong, I don't know, friendships or whatever. I would be like, turn it on, you know?
No, I mean, as a DM, you're just like, which thing am I gonna hurt them with next, right? Exactly. So it's one of those things that frankly a player has to be willing to invest in, that knowing it could, you know, for good drama, it could come back and bite him in the ass. Okay, so catching up on questions here, we also have from the Staggering Giant, how do you filter your ideas? Do you spend some development time on every idea before you ditch something, or is it more about experience of what works? It's a good question.
Oh, I think that could apply to either of us, but I mean...
I'll let you run with it. I've been talking about DMing for a bit here.
I love it. But I mean, like, filtering ideas for writing is, there's no, like, one thing that causes me to filter an idea. Usually when I'm coming up with preliminary stuff, I'll let any idea have play on the table. Like, I'll just do, like, an idea dump, and I'll say, okay, so what from this can I piece together that will form a story? And so just by doing that, I mean, that probably negates a lot of the ideas that I wouldn't use in that case. But how do you filter stuff? It has to pass the cool test. Like, do I legit think this would be cool, and am I going to enjoy writing it? And then some things have to meet requirements for, will this move the story along? So, you know, sometimes I have a couple really cool scenes that I've been thinking about forever, and I have to build a way between them. So I guess I'm filtering in a way, or I'm taking the things I most like and then figuring out how to tie them together.
Yeah. And I imagine you have a lot of hard decisions to make because you get your adventures to fit on, like, each act or each scene is kind of one page. So I imagine you have a lot that you have to cut. And you mentioned earlier leaving kind of a lot on the cutting room floor. So
on a micro level, like when you're sitting down and actually writing, there's always cutting. There's always cutting happening while you're writing, even when you're in the idea stage. It doesn't stop. Editing is cutting almost always. So I think you have to embrace the idea of cutting and viewing it as a good thing.
Right.
And, you know, enjoying the abundance of ideas, but thinking, how can I reduce this to its simplest bits?
Sure. It's like coming up with the MVP, the minimum viable product, right? I named this engineers for a very specific reason. It feels almost like, you know, I think we both work in IT, right? And so the approach to major IT projects are kind of similar. You know, in Agile, people come up with all their ideas. Man, I would love if the software did this and it made me coffee and it checked my email for me. And you throw all the ideas out, and then you really have to focus on what's most essential to the business. What's the value to the application that we can get done. And I think the same really can be said about adventures, right? You make these very elegant solutions that do something very well. Don't try to do everything, but try to do a couple of things really, really well.
Yeah, and that it helps to focus on, when I'm writing, having like a dramatic question, like what's the narrative goal of this scene? That is so important to know when you're writing, because the scene needs to speak to that goal. And so
right.
If you're sitting down to write something, you have to know what the point of it is first. And then you have to try to get to that goal or figure out a way to resolve that question with a yes or a no.
Right. Yeah, great answer. Okay, got a couple questions here, and guys, we'll probably just take another 2 or 3 questions before we kind of wrap it up. So go ahead and get your questions in, but I'm catching up on a couple. One is, have you written encounters based on a rule or aspect of the game that you liked or didn't like? That's a good question. I don't. Speaking for myself, I don't know that I've necessarily based one on a rule or aspect I don't like. Let me think about that for just a second. How about you? Any response to that one?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Fortunately, I don't often find myself having to write stuff I don't like, which not every writer can say, you know, like, right. But I'm lucky that I get to really pick from what I enjoy writing. So I can definitely say I really, for some reason, like drowning mechanics, or like things that force time pressure.
Yeah, so, me too.
Yeah, because that, like, a time crunch is a really impactful way to make something scary and exciting. So I do that all the time. I think actually in almost every encounter I've written, there is some form of a timer.
Yeah.
You could reverse engineer that, and that is thanks to
I
have to shout out the Runehammer channel. He is a brilliant deconstructionist of like encounter design, and he talks a lot about using timers as a way to fuel character action.
Right. Yeah. Nothing like a little heat on the pan to get people moving.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay, here's another question. How do you build out what is in a town / world building? I find that I keep trying to put too much in every place. I'll run with that first, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. I haven't done a lot of homebrew world building, and every time I do, it's for the exact same reason. I'm like, okay, what are the 19 nations, and what's their histories, and how did we get here, and like what political events happened, and now I'm looking at this one town, and who lives in this town, and why, and I just get completely overwhelmed. And so I have to take a step back, and when I have run stories in a world I created, I will deliberately not even think about it until it comes up, and I'll let the writing happen kind of mid-world. So when I do it now, I will come up with a map and maybe a couple of high-level bullet points of, you know, this is kind of the region, and any other stuff that players might need to know, like maybe the Pantheon. I might come up with a Pantheon if we have a cleric or something. But then I'm like, you know what? We're going to figure it out as we go. And that's going to be how the world gets explored. It's a really hard thing, though. And I honestly, I don't feel like I have the time to do a good job homebrewing anymore. So I really don't. That's why we do our take on the Forgotten Realms, which is probably a good metaphor for why I love running your adventures, why I run that. I need some structure to start with, and then I'm comfortable kind of going from it. But starting from scratch, I'm not sure I'm the right guy for that.
Oh God, I mean, but I take a really similar approach actually, even when I'm writing something official. Like it's like less is more. I think that whatever you think is the bare minimum that you need for a town, I bet you could get away with half of that. Because if you have even like 4 bullet points of these 4 important people, imagine your players interact with every single one of those 4 people. you just have that just made like 3 sessions worth of gameplay. So so do you really need much more than that? So I would challenge you, if you feel like you're overbuilding your towns, try purposefully underbuilding them and then moving up and seeing what's missing.
Right.
Because you might be very surprised at how little you need to actually fill in the gaps.
Yeah, and maybe some other kind of tangible advice is you can have a couple of pre-made NPCs that you can be ready to pull in. You don't necessarily have to be like, okay, they're going to this town, and I think the blacksmith is this guy, especially if the story doesn't matter, right? And the tavern master is this woman. If they're not going to be serving the narrative, you can keep this little sort of, you know, in your back pocket, a couple NPCs that now, hey, we walked into the tavern and we want to speak to the owner. You can be like, cool, well, I guess this NPC is the owner now. And you have that you can, you know, be ready to apply as it comes up. Your players won't know the difference, right? They'll think, oh man, they planned for everything. But really, you're just like, you've almost got that primordial soup that you just, okay, now this is a thing that I need and I'm plugging it in right here. But you don't necessarily have to plan it all ahead of time. And I think that probably makes for a better story because you can focus on the things that they care about. Let the characters figure out what's important to them rather than you telling them, right, and focusing on the exposition.
Yep. Yeah, and just take notes as you're playing so that you can remember what it is you made up because that will happen a lot. But I completely agree. Like, I think that it's probably more fun and easier. It doesn't sound like it's going to be easier, but I actually think it's much easier to improvise those little things in the game and like give yourself the tools you need. Like give yourself a name list, like Steven said, because that's super critical. Like give yourself just a couple little things that you need to make anything up on the spot, and that is going to free you from either over designing and then not using it, or from having too much stuck in your mind that you're trying to juggle while you're just like talking about the town. You know? Right.
Yeah. It can get overwhelming fast, I think. And it can, you know, I think about my attention and my creativity as a limited resource. And when I try to think about everything, which I have before, I take a step back and think, man, I just spent like 6 or 7 nights thinking about a nation and what they're doing that my players will probably never even see. Like, that's just a waste of effort. Right.
Yeah.
All right, so one more question I saw in there, and it's from Shifty. This is or Shift Ms. 5, Shift My S5. I'm not sure. Here's a silly question for you both. What alignment do you think you are? I'm going to let you go first there. What alignment are you, Kelsey?
Oh, gosh. Okay, I've thought about this. I think I'm probably neutral good, because following all the rules all the time doesn't work, but I also kind of like having them as an option when I need them. And I just can't help being good. I would love to be neutral evil. I would love that.
Yeah, neutral evil will be more fun, but I was going to say neutral good too. That's how I feel. Yeah, you know, not lawful, because we can all agree there's some rules, whether they're societal or legal, that are like, okay, that's clearly not based in rationality, but you also can't trust people to always act in the best interest. So chaotic, I'm not a big fan of either. So.
Oh my gosh, we're both neutral good.
Yeah, good question, good answer. So again, we'll take 1 or 2 more questions if you guys have any more. Otherwise, I am going to let me look at the list of questions we had and think about something. Yes, this is something I really wanted to talk about tonight, and you and I have talked about some in the past, so we're cheating a little bit because this is kind of already put in place. How do you guide the story and the players without feeling like they're railroading? You know, and I think a follow-up question to that is, how do you deal with the players getting off the rails?
Right. So, gosh, okay, so we've kind of talked about this because this is a huge topic in tabletop role-playing in general. Like, what is railroading? Is it bad? Like, and I think that it's a little bit of a misnomer to call it bad, because railroading is essentially giving players a path to follow. It doesn't mean that you're taking away their ability to make choices. Like, right. So, I mean, I think my adventures could be called railroady because they're a set series of events in a specific location. Right. And if the players wander off away from that location, or something happens where they don't take the hook and start running the adventure, I mean, then the adventure won't happen. So, right. Is that railroading? I suppose, but player agency is the only thing that truly matters. So if their decisions do not affect the outcome, then that's like the bad kind of railroading. But if they have a series of events, but the decisions they make are going to greatly affect the outcome, that's not really railroading. And so that would be a good thing. Like, no matter how it's structured, even if it's like a series of dungeons that are just one similar room after another, if their actions in those rooms will change the ending, then it's not railroading, you know? So
yeah. No, I mean, I think I have very similar thoughts. And again, I know we've talked about this, that railroading tends to get a very negative context. It's almost like railroading sucks, but sandbox, now that's where the real fun is. And in my opinion, I agree completely. You want player decisions and player actions to affect the world, but railroading sometimes, you know, helps form a cohesive narrative too. If you just, I mean, if you look at the complete extreme where, hey, this is just a world and you guys do whatever you want, that can be super fun too. But railroading can be super fun too, because railroading kind of allows you to have, you know, an arc. You can have a beginning, a middle, an end. You can have all those things that narratives have of rising action and the climax, and you can think ahead about them. But, you know, if you get too strict and you're too rigid about where you need that to go, then you're just a DM telling a story. So I tend to take the approach that, you know, I almost think of it, there's an old term from ages ago used in military formations called a string of pearls, which essentially, here's a really important thing that I need to happen. What happens here, I don't care about. This, do whatever you guys want, make your decisions, and it'll be really cool. And then the next kind of thing. So I tend to have, actually very similar, I guess, to the way your adventures are presented, I tend to have encounters and events and outcomes in mind, but how we get there isn't always the same. And those events and outcomes are certainly far from set in stone. That they can change, you know, at the drop of a hat, knowing that it might not affect, you know, down the road, kind of where I'm going from a big arc. But yeah, it will definitely affect the short term and have ripple effects on the rest of the world. So you know, I think we've talked about this too, and this is for a later conversation. You know, Hoard of the Dragon Queen was just pegged for being super railroady and super linear because it's essentially a tour of the Sword Coast. But in fact, we had an absolute blast with it. So, you know, sometimes telling the players very clearly, this is the thing you guys have to do, but then letting them figure out how is super fun, rather than just do whatever you want, which can also be fun.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny because like extreme sandboxing is also like, I would argue that it's probably the least fun way to play D&D sometimes, if you're just like, well, you're in the world, what do you do? Because people are playing the game of D&D because they want an episodic narrative. They right. want to be heroes and they want to have a purpose.
Yes.
And a story isn't necessarily going to be reflective of the way the real world works, where just like stuff happens and you don't know, and there's no meaning to it sometimes. Like
right.
A D&D game, like honestly, it has enough elements of a story where it has to have some form of meaning and purpose, or it's not really fun to play. So
right.
In a way, that railroading is sort of like presenting an episode, and that's kind of required for a story in a way.
Yeah, and I think we handle that, you know, something we talk a lot about by we allow the world to react to the actions of players in a very meaningful way. So when a player has a certain personality trait or a flaw or a behavior that they do, we always make sure NPCs react realistically to them. And so that lends to that verisimilitude. And so you can you know, have different paths to get you to some of the same spots, even if things are going very differently than what you as a DM envisioned. Because I've certainly seen the kind of worst case scenario where a DM is just out to tell their story, and they will do whatever they can to make sure the players don't disrupt that. And maybe the story is incredible, but if the players are like, cool, I'm just a character in their story, then they've lost interest. But you can make it a collaborative thing, right? I mean, you know, I'm super #blessed with my crew of like, I've got a really cool story I want to tell, and you guys have really cool characters, and I want to weave that together, and let's work together, you know, to you know, I know my players won't derail me. I mean, not often, and they will in micro moments, right? In the tactical things, they will always throw something for a loop, but you know, rarely would they be like, cool, there's a thing that we're supposed to do. We're not going to do that. We're gonna instead go to the tavern and drink, and we're then gonna, be murder hobos. My players don't do that, and there's even a little bit of external chat of like, hey, we know this is a collaborative storytelling thing. We got to work together. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. We could probably fill a whole episode talking about railroading, and that might be interesting, but maybe not.
Yeah, but it's like such a hot button topic for. I don't know, for some reason, because I think at one point somebody took a really strong stance. If somebody important said railroading is bad,
right?
And so I don't think I agree with that. But
right, yeah,
try it yourself and see. I guess is what I'll say.
Agreed. All right, so I think we're coming up on the hour. So this has been super fun. Thank you guys for joining us. Kelsey, why don't you say once again where people can find you, where they can find your work, and I'll share the link to your website in chat right now.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm the Arcane Library, so you can find my work on thearcanelibrary.com. I have adventures and stuff there, some game aids. I also just released a book that I co-wrote with a guy named Matt Rauscher, and he's the.
It's good. It's good.
Fun. It's monsters. It's monsters and some playable races. But it's called The Monstrous Lexicon, and it's on Amazon. And the contributions I made to that were so fun to write. So
yeah, they're great.
Check out.
I just got it 2 nights ago, or I guess, and tore through it. It was fantastic. To answer some questions, this is a new stream on an existing channel, so hope you tune in. We play Sunday nights and Tuesday nights in person. We've got some other games around with some folks around the country around the world that we've become good friends with. So hope you guys can check some of those out. Thank you, Kelsey, again for joining. This was super fun. I am going to pay it forward, and we are going to launch a raid right now. We're going to launch a raid on, our friend Welcome Party RPG. I would not be doing what I do if it weren't for Welcome Party RPG, and I bet you there's more than one person in the chat right now who could say the same. Kicking off the raid right now. Thank you guys for joining us. I had a blast. Kelsey, hope you had a good time. This was fun.
I had so much fun. Thank you. This was great.
Absolutely. So we'll look at talking about, how often we do this. I definitely want to do it again. Maybe it's, every other week or something like that. We'll figure that out. So cool. Well, with that, thank you guys again, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, guys.